Hello and welcome to Public Affairs Public Access on Houston Media Source TV. I'm Linda Cohn with the League of Women Voters of Houston, and what a wonderful program we have for you this evening. August 26th is Women's Equality Day. Each year since 1971, the President of the United States has issued a Women's Equality Day proclamation commemorating the passage of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. It was the 19th Amendment that in 1920 at last secured for American women the most basic democratic right, the right to vote. And each year since 2011, the League of Women Voters of Houston has commemorated Women's Equality Day with a Rising Stars competition, recognizing those women and men who fulfill the promise of the 19th Amendment, the idea that everyone working together can pave the way to a brighter future. This is our way to identify, to congratulate, and to encourage Houston's emerging leadership, creating a legacy, if you will, just as the suffragists of 1920 created a legacy for us. We've invited young men and women of accomplishment to submit applications describing their work and their aspirations. One of our successful Rising Star candidates, class of 2019, is with us this evening, and we'll be talking with him in just a minute. Please call us with your questions and comments. We'll take as many of your phone calls as possible. The number is 713-807-1794. That's 713-807-1794. Backtracking just a bit, perhaps you'd be interested to know that the organization now known as the League of Women Voters is a direct descendant of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. That was the umbrella group that was so instrumental in securing the right to vote for women. When that was achieved, we did not pack up and call it a day. We regrouped into a new organization devoted to helping everyone, men and women, with reliable, nonpartisan information so that all voters could cast an informed ballot. Our three founding principles were that we were to remain nonpartisan, non-militant, and non-sectarian too. Here in Houston, the Harris County Equal Suffrage Association became the League of Women Voters of the Houston area. And I always get a kick of reminding people that one of our founding members was a librarian named Miss Julia Eidson, and a very important public building here in Houston is named for her. Well, let's get started. Giovanni Rosselli works at the University of Houston and has some interesting connections to the Houston sports community that we're eager to hear about, eager to explore. Welcome, Giovanni.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about where you're from. Are you from Houston? Are you a native son?
Indeed, I'm a native Houstonian. I was born just down the road at Memorial City Hospital off of I-10 in the Beltway. Huh? I have a fraternal twin brother. We look nothing alike. In fact, I'm 3 minutes older than him. We spent our formative years, though, in Sealy, Texas, which is, as my dad affectionately likes to call, small town America. It's 50 miles from downtown Houston, due west on I-10. So you pass Katy, you pass Brookshire, and then you hit Sealy. This day in 2019, it's got about 6,000 plus people. So that kind of gives you an idea of what life was like growing up in small town America.
You attended public schools?
I did, Sealy High School. Sealy is known for a couple of notable things. First, it's the birthplace of the Sealy mattress. A lot of people don't know that. And it's also the home of NFL Hall of Famer Eric Dickerson, who was a very prominent football player back in the day.
Yeah. When did you get the civic engagement bug? Because you know the League of Women Voters is all about civic engagement. No matter what else is going on in your life, civic engagement is there.
That's right. I've thought back long and hard about this, and there were a couple of influential figures back in my formative years out in Sealy. Number one was my grandmother on my dad's side of the family. She told us about 65 times when we were kids that she was a staff member at the Justice of the Peace, Precinct 3, and I believe she was a clerk. She certainly wasn't a judge. But she would tell us that story over and over, and she would tell us about her duties and her responsibilities. And whether we realized it or not at the time, I think she was trying to instill in us the values of public service and civic engagement, that being a public servant is a noble calling, being a part of something bigger than yourself. And it's needed work. It's absolutely needed. So I think the bug bit me then. That, and I had a great government teacher in the 8th grade in junior high. She was very hands-on in the classroom, and her eyes would well up in tears when she talked about Thomas Jefferson and Monticello and just politics in general. So 2 pretty big figures.
Yeah. Within your family, has anyone run for office? I take it that your grandmother's position was a civil service position. It was not an elected position. Is that correct?
Correct. To my knowledge, no one's run unless there's someone down the family tree that I'm not aware of.
Has anyone worked on a campaign other than you?
No, not that I know of.
You really are a trailblazer.
I caught the bug and it stayed with me.
Tell me about your teacher. Tell me more about your teacher. Was this the first time that American life, American political life was made so vivid to you?
I think so. Her name was Miss Sabota. She's no longer with us, but like I said, she was just very hands-on and very visual.
How large was the class? This is a small town high school.
It's a small town high school, so maybe 25-ish. But I vividly remember, and you'll have to excuse my naiveness here, it might have been World War I when there was something called trench warfare, and she turned out all the lights in the classroom, and she had kind of a strobe light going and a fog machine, and she threw literally critters like plastic rats and different things in the trenches, if you will. And that experience was just so vivid, and it still stands out in my mind.
Yeah, rather dramatic, I can imagine.
I would agree, but
I can imagine.
a lot of kids in the 8th grade are visual learners, so it stuck with me. And again, just her passion for government in general was very impactful.
Did she encourage you to get involved in politics, to maybe do a little bit of volunteering on a campaign, or to even visit Sealy City Hall?
Not to my knowledge, I don't recall that, but again, it's where I got the bug initially, and obviously it stuck with me. So.
What about student government in the Sealy schools? Did you ever run for student government? Was that considered to be a microscopic way of entering political life?
I was aware of it at the time, but I was kind of a little bit shy in high school, and I didn't think that was something for me. I was a youth pastor's kid growing up, so we were super involved in the church in town, and we worked a lot to pay for our cell phone bills and other things. So we were busy with that.
So your family was pretty much involved with faith-based activities? Tell me more about that, because we see so much in present life a convergence of faith and our civic faith. Does one inform the other? Did you find, was it a topic of discussion in your household? Was it something that was a presence in the same way that your grandmother's public service was a presence? Was that a presence in your life? The idea of service, perhaps, in all its different forms? Does that come from being a pastor's kid?
There's certain tenets of the faith that I grew up in that, were very prominent in our lives. Just being a public servant, being an all-around good person, loving your neighbor as you would yourself. I think those are all traits that we learned growing up in the church, and traits that I think when exhibited in civic life, I think they have a great impact. So we didn't really mix politics and faith much growing up. My parents were always very engaged, though, when it came to going to the polls, and we saw that behavior very early on in life, as well as with our grandmother. So when I became eligible to vote, when I turned the right age, it was a no-brainer for me. I was going to participate at the polls, and I have ever
Yeah.
since.
Yeah, this really is interesting to me though, because I've heard a number of people describe their calling to civic life coming directly out of a calling to be of service as their religion teaches them, as their theology teaches them, that there is civic life, that there is faith-based life, and the two of them exist side by side. But there's a certain community among engagement. When we talk about civic engagement in Houston, we talk a lot about voting, but that's only one element of civic engagement. And we keep on turning back to Hurricane Harvey, well over a year ago, as civic engagement in Houston at its best. People came to help their neighbors. People came to help organize efforts in hurricane relief when the need is urgent. Civic engagement doesn't mean that you start writing bills for recovery and reform. It means you get out there, and if you find out that your neighbor doesn't have electricity, and you do, you invite him to come on over and spend a couple of hours with you. Is that something that's played out, that you've seen played out?
I think definitely so. And, time and time again, to your point, when there's moments of severe need, as we saw in Hurricane Harvey, the faith-based community, it didn't matter what denomination of the church or what faith in particular, they all stepped up to the plate and they responded.
Because this is part of what defines us as human beings. This
Absolutely.
is part of what makes us human. And the lesson, and this is, as I said, a constant theme of discussions, the lesson is what? That civic engagement doesn't exist in a bubble that we save for Election Day. It's how we respond as a community to life events, the things that we're interested in talking about, to where we want our future to take us. And it plays out in schools, it plays out at the ballot boxes, it plays out at churches, and it plays out for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they can't be separated, as you said. They kind of run in parallel.
So from there we move on to, when you read grim figures about how only 30% of any one particular municipal election, only 30% of eligible voters will participate, don't hold your nose and say, "Oh, you horrible Houstonians." We are not horrible people. We are wonderful people. When the need arises, when we see the need arise, we're there. We may not be at the ballot box, and we'll talk about that in a little while. We may not be at the ballot box, but we are communitarian people.
Absolutely. And I think, while Harvey was certainly a terrible moment in our history, the optics on national TV of a city underwater, when everyone in the nation and the world is looking at Houston, we are at our finest, even in those dire circumstances. So something positive came out of it. And I think it was the optics of people helping other people.
Yeah, we needed volunteers to organize the volunteers. It was quite a profoundly moving thing to bear witness to. But even in among your friends, among your family, when someone needs something, there's always seems to be someone ready to help. So I think that's civic engagement as well, on a very personal level, very much a retail level. So while we're busy castigating ourselves for a lack of political involvement, let's not forget that. But in your school, which is so much a part of your life when you're a young guy, and all this, were there communitarian efforts that worked out well?
In high school, I was mostly involved in church, but I would say I did go on to college at Texas A&M University in College Station, which is known for being a very conservative school, but they do a lot of good out
Why did you go to A&M?
Why?
Why?
This ring opens up a lot of conversations. You can see it from a mile away. It's a great icebreaker, but I identified with the values of the school. My twin brother and I both went there together. And it felt like home away from home. When you grow up in small town America in Sealy, College Station is kind of another iteration above Sealy. So it felt like home to me. And I saw that their alumni go on to do wonderful things, and it was just a no-brainer for me.
That was where you wanted to be. What
Absolutely.
did you study?
I studied sport management, and I minored in business. And I have to go all the way back to a sixth grade writing assignment, and I kept it all these years. And it's fascinating because there was part of the assignment where the teacher asked us to identify what it was that we wanted to be when we grew up. And I wrote down 2 goals. I said, number 1, I want to work in professional sports. And number 2, I want to work in public service. Sixth grade mind, you have no idea how you're going to achieve those goals, but I wrote them down because I was supposed to for the assignment. And it's fascinating to reflect on that paper and see that all of my life choices from then until now have been to achieve those goals. So after I graduated with a sport management degree from A&M, I enjoyed a 6+ year career in professional sports. So I worked for the Houston Rockets here in town for a couple of years. I did an internship in corporate development, and then I did ticket sales. So you really develop a thick skin pretty quickly when you do that job. And after that, I took the plunge, moved to San Antonio, Texas, and worked for the Spurs for about 4 years.
Okay.
And I did season ticket account retention at that time. So building relationships with a large number of people and retaining business for the organization. That was the name of the game.
Yeah. Back at A&M, did you take any classes in politics or government or history beyond what was minimally required?
Believe it or not, I took the prerequisites, and that was pretty much it. I think I was very career focused at that time. Our grandmother blessed us by helping us with tuition, and that kind of motivated us not to play around with the electives, and we were just dead set on graduating on time.
And getting that first job?
Absolutely. So yeah, the sports bug bit me in 6th grade, as did the public service bug, apparently.
Do you happen to remember any professor at A&M who hit you maybe a little bit in the same way that that marvelous teacher who did trench warfare live for you at in the Sealy Public Schools? Did anyone strike you in quite the same way at A&M?
That's a good question. I would say probably by far my favorite class at A&M was titled Communication and Popular Culture. I didn't think it was going to be my most favorite class, but it was all about commercials and TV and movies, and he just presented the subject matter in a very honest way, and I was fascinated and impressed by it at the same time. And it resonated with me.
Did you happen to study political commercials, political promotions as part of that?
Not to my recollection. It was mostly just popular culture.
Yeah, so you were really thinking about political and civic life as more personal than people who study it or join. You did not join the Young Democrats or the Young Republicans or the Young Libertarians. You did not work on. Was it a presence at A&M at the time? What years were you there? This would have
I
been
graduated
what year?
in 2008.
Okay,
So
so-
it certainly was prevalent. But again,
But
I
it
had
wasn't-
my eyes on the prize. Graduate in 4 years.
Well, there are a lot of people who would find that to be very commendable. And then you were off to San Antonio, among other places. As you did your corporate work, was there ever an element of civic engagement involved? Do you recall anyone ever handing you a voter registration application and say, "Are you registered to vote?"
Not within the professional sports setting. Certainly the Rockets and the Spurs have their charitable arms. The Rockets have the Clutch City Foundation. The Spurs have Silver and Black Give Back. So they were very involved in the community. And to our earlier conversation, civic engagement of a different sort.
Yeah.
But not anything overtly political, I guess I should say.
Yeah, and then you came back home to Houston after your time in San Antonio.
I sure did. I had a good friend who had made the switch from professional sports to higher education. And anytime I'm explaining that jump in my resume, people are kind of flabbergasted. They don't see how the two worlds relate. But really and truly, my skills transferred beautifully from sports to higher ed. And, in 2013, 5 years ago, I was kind of nearing that point where I knew Houston is where I want to be long term, both professionally and personally. And I wanted to be a part of something bigger than me. And what better place to do that than within higher education? So 5+ years later, I'm still a staff member at the University of Houston.
Tell us what you do with the University of Houston.
Currently, I work in the development office for the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. We're the biggest college at the UH campus. Any given point in time, we have about 11,000 students from undergrad to PhD level. UH as a whole has over 45,000 students, which a lot of people are surprised to know. But my job primarily is to work with individuals, be they alumni or friends of the college, and help align their philanthropic interests with goals and needs of the college. So we have donors that are passionate about impacting student success initiatives, so they might fund a scholarship. We've got some donors who are passionate about engaging in academia, so they might support faculty research or establish a professorship. But the key is donor intent. We follow the donor's lead, and we try to match their interest with a goal or need.
Do you find any donors who are interested in the Hobby School of Public Affairs, which is enormously active in the community, doing community-based studies, academic studies, in addition to providing students with a platform to achieve the very best of their aspirations academically and enter into careers in politics and public policy?
I'm almost certain, have donors that are passionate about the Hobby School. At UH, we are a little bit siloed in terms of the 14 different colleges. So I'm specifically assigned to liberal arts and social sciences.
Okay.
We call it class because the college name is kind of a mouthful, but
Yeah.
our dean likes to say we're a class above the rest. So within class, I should clarify, we do have the political science department. So that is where we see a lot of the civic-minded donors.
Okay, and the Hobby School is apart from that.
The Hobby School is its own separate entity at the present time.
And it probably has its own funding structure and its own
and its own fundraisers.
and its own fundraisers as well. Can't do much without fundraisers. It's the truth that we must live with.
Very important.
Well, tell me, the new Congress was sworn in today, January 3rd, and many of us are still somewhat gobsmacked by the levels of participation. We alluded to this a little bit earlier in our conversation. The levels of participation, those who have voted in Harris County in the 2018 elections, a little bit closer to what we normally see in a presidential election year, which is good. Cross the 50% threshold. We usually don't do that for a midterm election when there's no president on the top of the ballot. Usually we hover in the 30% area, to our great disgrace. What was different about 2018?
Gosh, I would say the difference, and this is my personal opinion.
Yeah,
of course.
That's what we're asking, yeah.
Quite honestly, just the dynamics in D.C., the rhetoric that we're seeing in D.C., I think it really inspired people. Whether it resonated with them in a good way or maybe a not so good way, it inspired people to get to the polls. You know, a lot of times we hear people that say, well, I'm not going to bother voting. My one vote doesn't make a difference. But it's that mentality times millions of people across the country, and that's why we have certain things. So I really think it was the rhetoric that people were hearing, and they knew that collectively they could make an impact, and it was inspiring to see the turnout that we saw.
How do we extend it?
How do we extend it?
How do we extend it for the future? How do we maintain it?
I think finding inspiring candidates to run for office, I think that's important, especially for the younger generation. I think they want to see themselves reflected in the political landscape. And when they see someone that looks like them and talks like them, they're inspired to show up to the polls.
You know, we have sat around this very table having conversations about this over a period of years. And some people will tell you over and over again that there are quirks in the Texas election system that we must remedy if we want to see better participation, routinely better participation in the electoral process. And people at the other side of the table will sit and say, we have tinkered, tinkering is good, we should continue to tinker, but if you really want to see significant numbers of people flock to the polls, there has to be an issue they care about that's significant. There has to be a candidate that they either absolutely want to see get into office or a candidate they absolutely do not want to see get into office. And all the tinkering, and we'll talk about some of those little quirks in the Texas election process that can be adjusted, but no matter what you do, says half the world, it's not going to matter unless people are voting on something about which their passions are, forgive me, but I'll use the word inflamed.
And I think that's very true. And sometimes I take for granted that I work at an institution of higher education, and it's just so intellectually stimulating, and I'm around students all the time.
Yeah.
We had a particular candidate come to campus in Beto O'Rourke recently, and I was sitting in Cullen Performance Hall, and I was trying to figure out if I was at a Beatles concert or if I was at a Kennedy rally. I mean, it was incredible, just the momentum and just the energy that we felt in that room, and it was because
there was a candidate that people were very, very excited about.
Absolutely. The energy was palpable.
And that's what did it. Well, there are certain details about the election system. I'll ask you your opinion about that. In Texas, you have to be registered 30 days before the election. In some states, you can register to vote on the day of the election. You just show up at the polling place, you can register on the spot. Has that been a damper, do you think, to better participation, or do you think that's something that we need to maintain in order to maintain the integrity of the election?
That's an interesting question. I think I've been paying attention to the national landscape recently, and there's several states that are experimenting with what they're calling AVR, automatic voter registration. And it seems to be this concept where, as opposed to opting in, you're already opted in, and you need to opt out if you don't want to vote, if I'm recalling it correctly.
Yeah, some states do have that provision. I don't think it's been active long enough to really come to a determination yet. But this is something that Texas has thought about and rejected. Texas at one time did have same-day voter registration. You had to fill out some paperwork at the polling place, and there you were. But you talk to people. You are civically engaged. We finally got you out of sports, and we got you out of employment-focused work, and we have you out there in the broader arena, and you talk to people. You described a very lively scene at the University of Houston campus in support of a particular candidate. Do you have the feeling that this is going to make a difference, that some people just don't get registered by that deadline? Because the registration process is really quite simple. A voter registration application is the easiest application, the easiest government piece of paperwork you are ever going to fill out. There are only 10 elements required. We have clocked it in at 90 seconds. And you don't have to pay if you're putting it in the mail, you don't have to pay. It's postage paid. What do you think? You think that would make a difference if we had same-day voter registration?
I think it could.
Or automatic voter registration?
So I think I told
Just
you.
your gut.
I think I alluded to this when I volunteered for the first time at the KPRC to Election Day Phone Bank.
Yeah.
We had members of the citizenry calling in, and whether they knew it or not, I felt like they were prescribing reasonable solutions to pain points, if you will. And we can talk about how simple voting registration is, but to some people, any small barrier,
Sure.
any small
We
imposition.
are election wonks. The rest of the world is not. Tell us about the KPRC phone bank before you describe your experiences there, because it was a hoot.
I enjoyed it a lot, and it was so funny because obviously with this head of hair, it's a blessing and a curse because I'm recognized anywhere I go, and I had a couple of friends from.
All right, tell us how you spent your election day. It did not begin with the phone bank.
No,
it began at 4 o'clock in the morning.
That's right, with Mr.
This is why you're a rising star, because you take on these assignments cheerfully and competently and come back for more.
You've got to jump in with both feet if you want to be engaged in a meaningful way, I guess. But I was on
Civic engagement in Houston, election division at its very best. You woke up on election morning, November 6, 2018, and what did you do?
I went to a polling location off of West Gray which I had been to before, but I had never seen it
The
at that
multi-service
hour of the
center.
morning.
Yes.
And we met up with Mr. McKinney, as he's called here locally, and he has what he calls the Houston History Bus. And he gives historic tours of Houston, but he's very versatile, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to make things easier for the community. And he was gracious and gave us use of the bus. So we had signs encouraging people to get to the polls, and we rode through town on the bus. It's an open air bus, and we had KHOU Channel 11. They had a reporter and a camera crew, and a fellow rising star and I just answered basic questions about election day and polling locations and what ID do you need to bring, and can I vote anywhere in Harris County, which is not the case. You can in early voting, but not the day of the election.
Yes.
So it was a fun experience just to be out there in the community. And then I capped it off with the phone bank.
Yes, because democracy is a joyful and hopeful form of government. We are not downtrodden folk. We know that we have the tools in our very hands to make life better.
Absolutely.
And you're out there cheerleading for that.
Yeah, but back to the phone bank for a brief minute. That was
Yeah.
a fascinating
So
experience.
after you did your stint on the history bus, you went over to KPRC studios where we had our all-day election day helpline. League of Women Voters has been staffing this for a very long time, and people call in with questions that become more and more interesting every year. Tell us about your favorite questions.
That's right. And I should say between the history bus and the phone bank, I was at work for a full day. And then I convinced the supervisor to let me off a little bit early to volunteer for the phone bank. But
You were persuasive.
that was a fascinating experience, I have to tell you. As I said earlier, people were prescribing solutions that I thought are reasonable. One of the questions I got was, can I vote online? I said, that's an interesting idea, but no, unfortunately you can't. Someone asked, can I, I forget all.
You know who gets to cast a ballot online? Astronauts.
Well, we're few and far between, right?
That's who are registered to vote in Harris County. If they're in low Earth orbit on the space shuttle or the space station now, they get to cast their ballot through a very special means. But they're the only ones who can do it. Everybody else has, well, you'll tell them.
I'll have that answer ready for next
Yeah.
year's phone bank.
Someone calls in that question and say, well, do you happen to be an astronaut in low Earth orbit right now?
Right.
If not,
I don't want to
you
presume.
can't even register online in Harris County. And as a matter of fact, throughout the state of Texas, you cannot register to vote online. You can print out your application, but you have to put it into the mail.
Yeah, we had some citizens asking questions about, well, I live in Harris County. Can I vote in Fort Bend, or can I vote at other locations across the county? And I said, it's not early voting. Unfortunately, you have to vote at the place that you're registered at. So that was a revelation to a lot of people.
Confusion. Earnest citizens wanting to cast their ballot, seeking good, reliable information, then call you when you get to help people cast a ballot, which is a profoundly wondrous thing.
It was very rewarding, and I have to say my favorite phone call of the evening was a woman who I literally gave turn-by-turn directions.
Yeah, tell us about that from the very beginning.
She-
Someone called from her car.
That's right. She called from her car, or what I would presume to be her car. And the phone call took a while because I was giving her turn-by-turn directions to her polling place. And that was inspiring because I knew that I got that person to the polls. And perhaps without that phone call, maybe she wouldn't have gotten there.
Yeah. So by and large, you found people who call. I mean, we think this is a pretty accurate slice of the electorate in Harris County. People who call into KPRC, what they want to know mostly is, where do I vote?
Or am I registered? That was another big question.
Yes. Tell me what you think needs to be tweaked in Harris County based on those phone calls. We mentioned registration. Am I registered? You could look it up, and that's when you discover that, oh, sorry, you were 48 hours late with your voter registration application, and you can't vote in this election. So same-day voter registration would remedy that.
Absolutely. I think that'd be a great solution. I don't know how how feasible it is. I'm sure everything takes manpower.
Well, as I said at one time, Texas did have that. We might have it again sometime. Some states do have it. Something to keep in mind when we talk about adjusting the Texas election code.
Sure. I think it'd be interesting too, and I learned this from the Election Day phone bank, that there's some surrounding counties in the region that you can vote at any precinct as long as it's in the county you're registered.
Yes.
But Harris is different. You have to vote at the precinct in which you're registered on Election Day.
That's right. During the early voting period, any registered Harris County voter can vote at any early voting location. On Election Day, you have to vote in your precinct, in your neighborhood of residence. However, next week, before Commissioner's Court, we will begin the steps. The newly elected Harris County Clerk, Diane Trotman, will begin the steps to make Harris County one of those counties that uses voting centers on Election Day as well. So we don't know how much longer that will be in effect. But it's true, during the early voting period, you have your choice of places to vote. On Election Day, it's your home precinct.
And that was a revelation for a lot of people. And it's a big difference between voting close to your workplace and voting where you live. Because as we know, a lot of people in Houston have a long commute, and you could almost sense it in some of their voices that it's too much of a hassle to go all the way out there, right?
Yeah, and you try to check your Google app and see how long it's going to take you to get there, and foiled again. But that's one of those things. What about the idea of everyone being able to cast a mail ballot? Presently, throughout the state of Texas, you can vote by mail if you're going to be away from the county during Election Day and during the early voting period, if you're over 65, if you're sick or disabled, and the sickness or disability can be temporary or permanent, and you do not have to come in with medical documentations or a doctor's note. It's by your oath that you're unable to attend a polling place because you're sick or disabled, or if you're incarcerated without the right to vote being removed. Those are very specific requirements. What would happen if, as in many places, anyone could vote by mail?
I think it would be helpful in increasing the turnout. We might have a bit of a delay in terms of being able to predict or designate a winner. It might take a bit longer to count the ballots. But again, I think the conversation that we should be having is how can we eliminate perceived barriers to voting?
Yeah, any change is going to take a bit of doing to incorporate into what we think we know about Election Day. I think we have a phone call. Do we have a phone call?
Hi, yes. I just have a question. In your stream, I'm watching it stream live, and I was very moved by how Giovanni was, participating in the voting aspect and asking questions. And I want to know, as far as how can normal day-by-day people could also help and be those lights to those who don't have any idea of how to vote, or how can we help those people that are, just on voting day, in our local times?
That's the essence of civic engagement. Neighbors helping each other. There are so many ways. We're very fond of our voters guide. The League of Women Voters publishes a voters guide in advance of every election. The information is completely impartial, nonpartisan. Every ballot candidate for any particular race is asked the exact same questions. They provide the answers, and we distribute that directly as the candidates have submitted it to us without verification or any form of editing. I mention this because people will very often say, I don't know who to vote for.
Right.
And we can go ahead, you can go ahead and provide them with a voter's guide. It's available electronically. You can get it at a library. So being able to tell your friends who are interested in voting but don't quite have all the resources at their fingertips about reliable resources to get information on the election and on the candidates is hugely helpful. Probably the best thing to do is to always, wherever you go, have a stack of voter registration applications with you. No, I am not kidding. You go to the doctor's office, ask the receptionist, can I leave these here?
Oh, that's a good idea. I see that a lot of women in our culture, in the Hispanic culture, tend to not vote because they're not informed. And I know as a first generation going through school and having that lifestyle where my parents came and they did this for us, I want to be able to reciprocate that and kind of encourage them to vote, and also my fellow Hispanic women that aren't informed. So I think that's one of my biggest things right now as well.
I would say first voter registration, because as we've been talking, as Giovanni and I have been talking, you have to go be registered 30 days in
Right.
advance of every election. Voter registration really is easy, but it has to be done. So if you go to any office of the Harris County Tax Assessor Collector and say, can I have a stack of voter registration applications, please? They're going to give you some. And wherever you go, it doesn't have to be in a civic engagement bubble. You're out in your church, you're out at the grocery store, you're out at a school perhaps, or as we said, the doctor's office, or any place that you go. You can ask permission to leave some of these, or you can hand it to someone and say, are you registered to vote at your current address? And can you pass this along to someone who might need a voter registration application? These small little things that we do. Now, if you want to get involved in a larger way, please get in touch with us at lwv@lwvhouston.org. We will have about 1 million things for you to do. But just these small communitarian things are so meaningful in the political landscape. And if you'd like to join us at our KPRC phone bank for Election Day 2019, we'd love to have you. Giovanni, chime in with your thoughts.
I would say, just to reiterate, with the League of Women Voters voter guide, we live in a very diverse community, and we translate that voter guide into multiple languages. And if you can remind us
Including
the ones that
Spanish.
it's already translated
Yeah,
into.
we translate in, of course, English, and then we have professional translators who provide a faithful translation into Spanish and Vietnamese. So the people who are more comfortable using a different language other than English will have access to good, reliable information as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Y'all are doing such a great job, and it's very informative, and I just love hearing y'all's point of view and the perspectives and how I could further apply it to not only my voting, but also encouraging others to vote as well.
Thank you so much for calling. Gemini, talk to us more about these institutional quirks that may create a barrier. We talked about the requirement for voter registration 30 days in advance of the election. We do not have universal mail-in ballots. Some states only deal in mail ballots. I know there's concern about ballot harvesting, which is, we've actually had some problems with ballot harvesting in Texas that makes people a little bit queasy about it. But the regulations about mail-in ballots are in place to try to keep that down to a minimum. And of course it is a felony to collect ballots in that fashion and go ahead and mark them or turn them in as voted ballots when in fact you have no right to vote on behalf of this person. So we're always alert to that. And we talked about having to vote in your precinct on Election Day, which may not be the most convenient option. People know about curbside voting, for example.
I didn't know about it.
But you knew about it when you were when you did the training for that KPRC phone bank.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah, I was not aware of that. So I think, to encourage the caller from earlier, I think what you don't know, you can figure out the answers to. It just takes jumping in with both feet and getting involved. There's so much information available online, and a place like LWV has valuable information. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good resource for everybody.
Tell us about curbside voting. A lot of people don't know what it is. Maybe someone listening will take advantage of it next time. You know, curbside voting is drive-through voting, it's sometimes called. And for someone who it's not safe for you to get out of your car, you drive to your polling place, whether it's during the early voting period or whether it's on election day itself, send a companion in with your identification documents, and they'll bring an eSlate voting machine right to your vehicle.
Yeah, no, that was a revelation to me, for sure. And
Don't have to make plans in advance. Every polling place has the availability of bringing an eSlate voting machine to your car. And if it's not safe for you, you think, well, what kind of situation might that be? Think about someone who has overextended himself on the basketball court the day before election day and finds they can't request a mail-in ballot because there are deadlines for that, and maybe in a body cast or maybe just one or two limbs in a cast. That doesn't mean you've lost your right to vote.
sure, yeah, I really think it's just disseminating that knowledge to the masses and
Disseminating knowledge may be the key.
and kind of demystifying the process, right? I think some people get a little bit, their eyes glass over when they think about the voting process sometimes. And I think if that knowledge
Is
was
there a
out there-
chilling effect? That's an interesting point that you've brought up. Is there a chilling effect? People hear a little bit about voter ID, for example, and they think, no way, I don't have these documents. Well, voting's not for me. I'm out of here. But in truth, you know the 7 forms of photo identification that you need to bring to the poll. This is not applied to ballots by mail, but if you're going to vote in person, whether it's during the early voting period or on election day, you have to come equipped with one of 7 government-issued forms of photo identification. And you remember this from KPRC. I'm sure you fielded a few calls from people who wanted to know, what do I have to bring? Of course, there's the Texas driving license. There's a Texas personal identification card. There's a concealed handgun permit. There's the election identification card. You can bring your naturalization certificate if you were a naturalized citizen. You can bring military ID.
Is a passport the 7th one?
And the passport is the 7th one. So 3 are issued by the federal government, and the 4 are issued by the state of Texas. And these can be current or expired within the last 4 years. If you're over 70 years old, they can be expired whenever. There's no deadline for that. But people don't know that. And people don't know that if they don't have one of those 7 forms of photo identification, there's another tier of identifiers that will work just as well. A utility bill, a bank check that shows your address. There's a whole menu of identifiers if you don't have one of those 7 golden forms of identification. So don't give up. Nearly everybody has something. So even though photo ID is a requirement, don't give up. There are ways of working around your election. Voter register. After you've registered to vote, you get a little voter certificate in the mail. It's a card, and it has your name on it, it has your address on it, it has your precinct number on it, it has many of your representational districts on it. That works too. That works too. So as you point out, there's nearly always a workaround, and it's our job to help you find it so that you can cast your ballot on election day.
And before we move off to polling sites on election day, I have to give a shout out to UH. They really did whatever they could to eliminate any constraints to getting to the polls. So for a few days during early voting period, they had shuttles that normally transport students from a parking lot to campus and back and forth. And they repurposed them to take students to a nearby polling site. And not only for students, but for faculty and staff. So I kind of felt some pressure to vote early in early voting.
See, this is you talk about social media being so prominent these days. Make it kind of like it was something to celebrate.
Absolutely.
And why not? It is something to celebrate. And I got to tell you, you know what reading material was available on those buses?
Probably our voter's guide.
Indeed it was. Indeed it was.
But, you know, to your point, what you were alluding to just now, I think the younger generation, they're so savvy on social media. And I think the more we can make voting kind of a cool thing to do. I saw countless celebrities, for example, make a call on Twitter to post your best I voted selfie. And people started chiming in with their I voted selfies and their stickers on their
That sticker
on their
was a
shirt,
mighty powerful fashion accessory, but you know in Texas you cannot take your smartphone or your tablet or your smartwatch or any device with connectivity into the polling place with you.
Of course.
So you can carefully research all those candidates, and unless you print out your choices, yeah, I'm afraid you're going to be kind of stuck when you get to the ballot. But that's another story. And there again, we can change these things. You know, perhaps a very good thing to remember is that voting as we know it now is not the way it's always been. In 1919 in Texas, women who were citizens could not vote, but men who were not citizens could vote. If you can change that, you can change just about anything about the voting process.
And I think it's important to maintain that perspective that while it might seem like a long time ago, it wasn't that long ago.
Indeed.
That was the case.
Indeed. There are people alive today who were born into an America where women did not have the right to vote.
Which seems almost unimaginable.
An
in 2019.
indignity, an indignity that is very hard to imagine. As our hour together draws to a close, let me ask you, where do you see Houston in 2020, 1 year from now, when the League of Women Voters will celebrate its centennial and the centennial of women voting in America?
Houston in 2020. Well, if you pay attention to Stephen Kleinberg over at Rice University's Kinder Institute, he claims that Houston is already 30, 40 years ahead of every other city in America. So people are looking to us as the future of the rest of the nation. But, you know, by 2020, I'd like to see Houston be much more resilient when it comes to the whole flooding issue. That's something that we need to figure out. And I'm hoping that we can make that happen. I'd love to see the city be more diverse from an economic standpoint. We pride ourselves on being one of the most diverse cities in the country, but when you drill down, I don't know if that's the case from an economic standpoint. I'm not claiming to have the answers on either flooding or economic diversity, but I think those are issues that we should be focused on. Maybe we could host another national sporting event or two by 2020. It's always great when we can get that national spotlight.
Okay, project 20 years from now. Where do you see Houston just 20 years from now?
Gosh, 20 years from now.
Which is not that far away.
No, it's not.
Not that far away.
I mean,
we have the immediate future, and then we have a little bit further down the road. We're building a foundation for both right now, even as we speak.
sure.
And as that wonderful caller mentioned, how do we help each other achieve a more just society?
Well, it starts with civic engagement, right? I think that's a big.
We know that this is a proven way.
Yes, absolutely.
This is the proven way.
So, you know, the things that I said earlier apply certainly 20 years from now as well. You know, I'd like to see us, I love our friends at Metro, but I'd like to see us focus on public transit, and hopefully in 20 years we'll have, continue to have an effective Metro, but maybe some more creative ways to move the population.
Will Houston swallow Sealy? Will Sealy become a bedroom community?
You know, I will say my parents, I'm willing to bet that they have a little bit of anxiety about that from time to time as we continue to build the fifth and maybe the sixth loop around Houston.
It happened to Sugar Land. It happened to.
There's been so many additions on the way to Sealy that weren't there when I was growing up. So it's impressive.
Yeah. Would you be happy to see Sealy become more part of Greater Houston, or do you want Sealy to stay Sealy?
You know, I don't know. I think people live in Sealy for specific reasons. I think they like to have their piece of the pie in terms of space and land. But I have to say, there is a difference living in Houston. I think sometimes we don't realize the bubble that we have and how beneficial it is to be around a diverse population and to be around a diverse group of faiths. It's important to listen to other people's life experiences, and that's something that I feel you can't get in other places. So I enjoy living in the big city, but I think people live in Sealy for their own reasons.
That's a lovely reflection to end on. Giovanni Rosselli, thank you for joining us this evening and for sharing your perspectives and aspirations as a rising star for the League of Women Voters. It was an optimistic and buoyant discussion, I think. Shifting gears for just a minute, we'd like to remind those of you living in Texas House of Representatives District 145 that there's a special election afoot to fill a vacancy. This election will be held on Tuesday, January 29th, with 2 full weeks of early voting preceding that. Early voting will begin on Monday, January 14th. I can't tell you who the candidates are. We know that there are 8 of them, but just a couple of hours ago, filing closed, and I just don't have that information for you yet. If you want to find out if you're eligible to vote in this special election to elect a representative from Texas House District 145, please visit the Harris County Clerk's website, www.harrisvotes.com. You can enter your address and you'll find out what's up for you there. And good news, we will soon have an impartial voter's guide for Texas House District 145 ready for your inspection at our website, www.lwvhouston.org. We know that Houston will continue to be a great place to live and a city that always keeps one eye on the future. Take good care. We'll chat again soon.